Take a deep breath. Forget about the white togas, the noble marble, and the heroic speeches from Hollywood movies. Today, we are descending into the basements of history, places even guidebooks are afraid to peek into. We will show you the true face of Rome, a face distorted by a grimace of sadism and insane pride. In this video, you will see the underside of the grandest show of antiquity, the Roman triumph. You will learn why golden chains on a captive queen were more terrifying than iron shackles, and what a monstrous price she paid just to stay alive. We will tell you about a great chieftain whom the Romans marinated alive in a stone bag, forcing him to wait for death for 6 long years in total darkness. You will hear the gruesome truth about how legionaries could tear a person apart for a couple of pieces of jewelry, and why laughter in an icy pit of filth is scarier than any scream. But we have saved the most shocking part for last. Be sure to watch this video to the end to learn the fate of a Roman emperor whom enemies turned first into a living footstool and then into a red scarecrow stuffed with straw. This is the story of how a machine of humiliation that worked for centuries once malfunctioned and returned to its creators like a bloody boomerang. Welcome to the Parade of the Doomed. Take a deep breath. Do you smell that? It is not the scent of incense or the freshness of the morning Tiber. It is the smell of 1,000 sweaty bodies, sour wine, cheap garlic, and animal fear. Welcome to Rome in the year 274 AD. You are at the center of the grandest, most expensive, and cruelest production in human history. But do not be deceived by the flowers thrown at the legionaries' feet. We are not here to celebrate. We are here to watch a human spine be broken. Right now, at this very second, moving along the Via Sacra, the sacred way, is not just a parade. It is a gigantic, gold-glittering meat grinder. Its name is Triumph, and if you think you know what that is, forget everything you have seen in Hollywood movies. Forget the white togas, clean marble, and noble profiles. The reality we are about to see looks less like a museum and more like a slaughterhouse that someone decided to decorate with garlands. Do you hear that hum? It is rising like a tsunami. That is the roar of the Roman crowd. Hundreds of thousands of throats merged into a single organism, hungry for a spectacle. They came here at dawn, taking places on the steps of temples, on roofs, hanging from the statues of their gods, just to see one thing: how those who commanded nations yesterday will crawl in the dust today. Look there, at the center of the procession. Do you see that woman? Try to make out her face through the clouds of dust. That is Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra, Mistress of the East. The woman who dared to challenge Rome itself, and for a short time, bit off 1/3 of the empire's territories. They say she was more beautiful than Cleopatra, and more chaste than Lucretia. She rode horseback better than any man in her army, and could drink wine on par with generals without getting drunk. But look at her now. She is walking on foot, and every step she takes is a feat bordering on torture. Did you notice how strangely she moves? How her knees buckle? How unnaturally her back is arched? That is not from fatigue. It is from the gold. The Roman Emperor Aurelian, that hard soldier who knows a thing or two about efficiency, devised a special torture for her. He did not shackle her in iron. Iron is a metal for slaves, for the rabble. For a queen, he chose gold. Zenobia is fettered in massive golden chains, golden manacles on her hands, golden stocks on her feet, a heavy golden chain around her neck. They say jewelers worked on them for weeks, creating a masterpiece whose sole purpose was to cause pain. This precious metal weighs so much that a frail woman simply cannot carry it herself. Look closer. Do you see that man walking alongside, bent double? That is a Persian jester. His task is to support the heavy links of the chain so that the queen does not fall and die prematurely. Irony, isn't it? Even in her humiliation, she cannot walk on her own. She is literally crushed by the wealth that was once the symbol of her power. Her skin under the shackles is rubbed raw and bloody. Gold is a soft metal, but it is heavy and merciless. Every movement of the procession, every stop, every surge of the crowd forces the metal to bite into living flesh. But she has no right to scream. She is a trophy, and trophies do not scream. Trophies must shine and provoke envy. The crowd is going insane. The plebeians, those spectators eternally hungry for bread and circuses, point their fingers at her. To them, Zenobia is not a tragic figure. To them, she is the empire's bank account come to life. Looking at her, they see not a broken woman, but a tax cut, free grain, and new games in the Colosseum. They look at her with the same lust a butcher has for a fattened pig. She is no longer a human. She is a thing. An expensive, exotic, dangerous thing that has finally been tamed and put on a chain. Do you feel that dissonance? On one side, incredible luxury. Chariots drawn by deer, elephants, tigers, mountains of looted goods carried on litters. On the other, absolute, concentrated human tragedy. The Romans were masters of this contrast. They knew, to truly destroy an enemy, it is not enough to kill them. Death is too simple, too fast. Death can make a martyr out of an enemy. No, the enemy must be turned into a laughingstock. They must be dragged through the entire city, shown to every beggar that this great king or queen is nothing but dust under the sandals of a Roman legionary. Their spirit must be broken publicly, with witnesses, this humiliation documented in thousands of eyes. Triumph is a machine of state terror. It is a message. Not to Zenobia. Everything has already been explained to her. It is a message to everyone else. To everyone standing in the crowd right now, and to everyone who might be plotting a rebellion on the distant borders. Watch, Rome says. Watch what we do to queens. Imagine what we will do to you. Aurelian, the soldier emperor, rides somewhere ahead in his chariot. He knows what he is doing. He does not revel in cruelty for the sake of cruelty, no. He is a pragmatist to the marrow of his bones. He needs to unite a crumbling empire, and for that, he needs this spectacle. He needs Zenobia in chains. Alive. Alive for now. The air on the Via Sacra is thick. You could cut it with a knife. The heat is unbearable. The sun reflects off the polished armor of the Praetorians and strikes the eyes. Zenobia takes another step. The jester supports the chain. The crowd explodes with laughter when she stumbles. Someone throws an apple core at her. It hits the golden handcuff and bounces into the mud. Think about this image. The greatest woman of the East, who corresponded with philosophers and knew the Egyptian language better than the Egyptians themselves, now walks under guard like a criminal, to the hooting of the rabble who cannot even read. This is the essence of Rome. It grinds down individuality, grinds down genius, grinds down greatness, turning everything into a gray, submissive mass held together by fear and concrete. But the scariest thing here is not even the physical pain from the chains. The scariest thing is Zenobia's eyes. If we could look into them right now, we would not see tears there. The tears dried up back in Antioch. We would see emptiness there. At the moment the golden collar snapped shut around her neck, the queen died. A shell remained, a doll whose strings are being pulled. And as the procession slowly, like a giant snake, crawls toward the Capitoline Hill, let us ask ourselves a question. What does a person feel who has been turned into a living monument to their own demise? What is she thinking under this deafening roar? Perhaps she is remembering Palmyra, or cursing the day she decided she could be equal to Rome. No. Most likely she is thinking about only one thing. When will this end? But she does not yet know that her role in today's script is far from over. The most terrifying part awaits ahead, where the road forks. There, where the celebration ends and the real work of the Roman executioners begins. For now, she just walks. Step. The clink of gold. The crack of a whip somewhere in the distance. The roar of the crowd. Step. The clink of gold. This rhythm is hypnotic. It hammers a simple truth into the subconscious. Resistance is futile. Rome is eternal. And you are not. But let us not forget why she ended up here in the first place. Why is this proud woman, who would have preferred death to captivity, walking along this cursed road? After all, history knows examples where queens chose poison. Why did Zenobia choose disgrace? The answer to this question lies not in her cowardice, but in the cold calculation of the man riding ahead in the chariot, and in the deal she made to save her life. A deal whose price was higher than all the gold hanging now on her exhausted body. You ask, why is she breathing at all? Why did Rome, which usually does not leave enemies even the right to a grave, allow this woman to keep her head on her shoulders? Do not flatter yourself. This is not an act of humanism. In Emperor Aurelian's dictionary, the word mercy is missing. It has been replaced by the word expediency. A dead Zenobia would have become a legend, a martyr whose name rebels would whisper in the sands of Syria for hundreds of years. A dead queen is a banner. But a living, broken, humiliated woman being led on a leash like a lapdog is just a political tool. Aurelian was a genius mathematician of power. He calculated everything with the cold precision of a butcher weighing a carcass. A living Zenobia in golden chains is living proof that resistance to Rome is not just deadly, it is pointless. But for this breath, for the right to walk on the scorching stones of Rome rather than rot in a nameless pit, the queen paid a price impossible to measure in sestertii or talents of gold. She paid with her immortal soul. Let's rewind the tape. Let's break out of the stifling Rome for a moment and transport ourselves to the city of Emesa, where her fate was decided a few months ago. There, in the cool tent of the Roman headquarters, a trial took place that court poets do not like to write about. There were no heroic speeches. It smelled of fear and betrayal. When the legionaries dragged Zenobia to Aurelian's feet, not a trace remained of the great warrior woman. Standing before the emperor was not a new Cleopatra, but a woman scared to death who very much wanted to live. And when asked, "Who put you up to raising a hand against Rome?" she did not take the blame. She did not say, "I decided so because I am the queen." No. She pointed the finger at those who stood behind her back. "I am just a weak woman," she babbled, looking into the emperor's cold eyes. "I was led astray. It is all them, my advisors, my philosophers. They were the ones whispering insane ideas about freedom to me." Imagine this scene. Standing next to her is Cassius Longinus, a great philosopher, rhetorician, a man whose mind was sharper than any Roman gladius. He taught her Greek. He taught her state governance. He was her friend and mentor. He believed in her dream of an independent Palmyra more than she did herself. And now his student, his queen, points at him like a naughty girl snitching on accomplices to avoid a spanking. Aurelian appreciated this gesture. He loved such deals. The life of one philosopher in exchange for the total moral capitulation of a symbol of resistance. A favorable exchange rate. Longinus and the other advisors were seized immediately. They were not spared. The executioner approached Longinus, and the philosopher did not even flinch. He did not beg, did not scream about betrayal. He accepted death with that stoic calm his queen lacked so much. The stroke of a sword, the dull thud of a body falling, and silence. At the second Longinus's head rolled across the sands of a mesa, the real Zenobia died. The woman who rode at the head of the cavalry ceased to exist. Only an empty, beautiful shell remained, willing to put on any chains just so her heart would continue to beat. She bought her life with currency of the dirtiest sort, the betrayal of those who loved her. Therefore, when you look at her now, walking along the Via Sacra, do not feel pity for her. Those golden manacles pulling her hands to the ground are nothing compared to the weight of that choice. The crowd sees a defeated enemy in her, but Aurelian, smirking in his chariot, sees in her his best accomplice. He broke her not with torture. He broke her by giving her the opportunity to betray herself. This is the highest level of Roman sadism, forcing the victim to destroy their own dignity, turning heroism into a farce. The Romans in the crowd, of course, do not know these details. They do not care about philosophy and moral dilemmas. They need a show. They see gold, they see exotica, they see fear, and it intoxicates them. But history is a ruthless witness. It records not only victories, but also what was paid for them. And in this case, the check is written in the blood of friends. The procession continues its movement. It is a gigantic, pulsating caterpillar crawling through the heart of the world. We are only at the beginning of the journey, but every step here has been calibrated for centuries. A Roman triumph is not a chaotic celebration. It is a strict geometry of death. And this geometry inexorably leads us to the point where human fates diverge forever. Look ahead. The road begins to rise. We are approaching the most important fork in the empire. It is not just an intersection, it is a filter. Here, at the foot of the Capitoline Hill, the common road ends and the segregation of souls begins. Directly before us, the contours of a place emerge that Romans are afraid to mention in vain. A place where the glitter of gold ends and the damp darkness of eternity begins. While the emperor's chariot prepares to turn upward, toward the shining temple of Jupiter to offer thanks to the gods, a different turn awaits the captives. To the right, down, to where the stones have not seen the sun for hundreds of years, into the stone sack, the very name of which makes blood freeze in the veins even of seasoned legionaries. Welcome to the threshold of the Tullianum, the sacred way, Via Sacra, the main artery of Rome, along which this insane stream is now flowing, is not just a street. It is the empire's ledger, paved with cobblestones. Look at these endless strings of carts crawling before the captives. It is a catalogue, an inventory of global plunder. There is nothing local here. Everything is stolen. Marble statues torn from Greek temples, chests of Persian silver, exotic beasts dying of terror in cramped cages. An elephant that has never seen snow now shivers from the Roman wind and the roar of the crowd. Giraffes, lions, rhinos. Nature itself has bowed before the legions. All these are things, and the people walking behind are also things. For a Roman citizen, there is no difference between a golden goblet and a deposed king. Both are trophies. Both belong to the people of Rome. Do you feel this cynicism? It is spilled in the air thicker than the smell of incense. Rome does not just conquer, it appropriates. It swallows cultures, digests them, and spits them out in the form of this parade. But this procession has an endpoint, and now we are approaching the moment of truth, the geographic point where everything is decided. We are at the foot of the Capitoline Hill. Here, at the fork, the main division occurs, determining the very essence of the Roman worldview. The contrast of up and down, light and darkness, God and sacrifice. Watch the emperor's chariot closely. At this moment, it turns right and up. It begins the ascent up the steep slope to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. There, at the summit, in the rays of the sun, in clouds of incense, glory awaits the emperor. There he is greeted as an equal to the gods. There he will sacrifice a snow-white bull whose horns are gilded to appease the heavens. This is the path to light, the path to immortality. The crowd sees him off with a rapturous howl, drowning out any thoughts. But look to the left. Do you see the convoy separating the main captives from the rest of the column? They are not destined to rise to Jupiter. Their path lies downward. They are turned into an alley leading to an inconspicuous, squat building. This is the Tullianum, the most terrifying real estate in the world. The stone stomach of Rome that digests enemies of the state. From the outside, this place looks almost modest. But inside, imagine a stone sack carved directly into the rock. There are no windows. There are no doors in the usual sense. The only entrance is through a hole in the floor of the upper level. A person is simply thrown down into the damp, cold darkness. It is not even a prison where one awaits trial. It is a death row cell from which there is no exit. Sounds of the celebration do not penetrate here. The smell of flowers does not reach here. It smells only of dampness, mold, and centuries-old horror. The walls of this dungeon have absorbed the last breaths of hundreds of chieftains, generals, and kings. Jugurtha, Vercingetorix, Sejanus, they all ended up here, in this stone gut. And then comes the culmination of the triumph. It is a perfectly directed moment, a masterpiece of the Roman bureaucracy of death. While above, under the blue sky, the priest raises the sacred knife over the neck of the sacrificial bull. Below, in the darkness of the Tullianum, the executioner throws a noose around the captive's neck. The connection is mystical. A life for a life. The bull's blood for Jupiter, the enemy's life for the peace of Rome. At the very moment the bull falls to its knees, bleeding out, and the crowd on the Capitol explodes in ecstasy, only a quiet wheeze is heard below. The executioner does his job routinely, without emotion. This is not the sadism of passion, it is the sadism of function. They strangle the throat with a cord, break vertebrae, or simply leave them to die of hunger if the emperor wants to prolong the agony. No one above hears the king dying. Their screams drown in the thickness of the stone and the joyful yells of the plebeians. The Romans above drink wine, laugh, discuss how much money the emperor will distribute. And meters below them, in absolute darkness, a man who commanded armies just yesterday convulses on a dirty floor, choking on his own vomit and hopelessness. This is the true face of the triumph. Above, a golden mask. Below, the rotten grin of a skull. The machine works flawlessly. It separates fates. To one, a laurel wreath. To the other, a hemp rope. And both knew that by evening their paths would diverge forever. But no one except the Romans could imagine how monstrous this contrast would be. It is a cold, mechanical process, like in a slaughterhouse. The carcass is butchered, meat to the gods, hide to the people, bones to the earth. Roman civilization stands on this foundation. For one to become a god, another must become nothing. Turn into garbage that will be secretly carried out via the Gemonian stairs and dragged by hooks to the Tiber, to be thrown into the murky water, depriving them even of the right to burial. It seems this system is perfect, that it does not malfunction, that anyone who falls into these millstones is doomed to become dust. The Romans believed this ritual protected them from fear, that by humiliating the enemy, they deprived him of strength. But history is a lady with a sense of irony. Sometimes humiliation does not break, it hardens. Sometimes, wishing to trample an enemy publicly, Rome received such a retaliatory blow that the very foundations of the empire shuddered. Sometimes violence breeds not submission, but monsters capable of burning this city to the ground. And if you think everyone went submissively into this basement, you are mistaken. There were those who understood the rules of this game too well. Those who decided it was better to burn in the flames of their own rage than to become a toy in the hands of Roman scriptwriters. Far to the north, on a foggy island, one woman was already preparing her answer to Roman arrogance. An answer that would make the legions choke on their own blood. Fog. Cold, sticky fog that chills to the bone even through a wool cloak. Forget the sun of Italy. We are at the edge of the world. In Britain. In a place Roman senators considered a cursed island, inhabited by ghosts and madmen. It was here that the imperial machine of humiliation, which worked like a Swiss watch in Africa and Asia, suddenly malfunctioned. And this malfunction cost Rome 70,000 lives of Roman citizens. It all started with a bureaucratic error. The Romans, intoxicated by their impunity, decided that humiliation was the universal key to control. When King Prasutagus of the Iceni died, he, a naive barbarian, bequeathed his kingdom to his two daughters and Emperor Nero, hoping Rome would protect his family. What foolishness. Rome does not protect allies. Rome consumes them. Instead of protection, tax collectors and centurions came to Queen Boudica's house. They came not to negotiate. They came to take. And when Boudica, a tall, red-haired woman with a voice that chroniclers say made walls tremble, dared to object, they decided to teach her a lesson. A lesson in Roman hierarchy. The scene that played out then, in front of the formation of legionaries, was supposed to be an act of discipline. Boudica, a queen and mother, was stripped and publicly flogged like a thief in the market. The whistle of rods tearing skin, the laughter of soldiers. They thought they were breaking her pride. They thought that seeing their queen in the mud, the Iceni would understand their place. But the Romans, those masters of tactics, made a fatal strategic error in psychology. It did not seem like enough to them. To consolidate their success, they entered the tent where Boudica's young daughters were. What happened there is described by Roman historians with bashful euphemisms, but we will say it straight. The soldiers took the girls' honor, future, and soul. It was not just violence for pleasure, it was a political gesture, a demonstration of complete, absolute power over the enemy's body. We can do anything to you, and nothing will happen to us. When the soldiers walked out of the tent, buckling their belts, they were laughing. They were sure they had crushed the barbarian woman. They expected tears, begging, submission. They expected the broken woman to crawl at the procurator's feet, begging for her life. But instead of submission, they got silence. A terrible, ringing silence in which a monster was being born. The Romans did not understand that on that day, by disgracing Boudica's daughters, they single-handedly signed the death warrant for an entire legion. Pain has a limit beyond which madness begins, or absolute cold rage. Boudica did not cry. She simply ceased to be human and became a force of nature. She became the living embodiment of Nemesis. She raised a rebellion that swept away Roman garrisons like dry twigs in a hurricane. Camulodunum, Verulamium, Londinium, proud Roman cities turned into funeral pyres. Imagine this hell. Londinium, the trading heart of Britain, is burning. The temperature at the center of the fire is such that glass melts. Fat from human bodies flows down the ditches, along with the lead from the roofs. The screams of Roman matrons, who just yesterday were carried on litters, drown in the roar of the flames. Boudica took no prisoners. She did not seek ransom. She did not want slaves. She wanted one thing: to inflict on Rome the same pain they inflicted on her, only multiplied by 1,000. 70,000 Romans and their allies were slaughtered. Not killed in battle, slaughtered. Crucified, hanged, burned. Do you know what the scariest part is? Archaeologists excavating London still find a thick layer of red ash and burnt clay. They call it the Boudican destruction layer. It is a scar on the body of the earth that has not healed even after 2,000 years. You can take this ash in your hands. It is all that remains of Roman arrogance. In the end, of course, the legions prevailed. Discipline beats rage. In the decisive Battle of Watling Street, Roman tactics ground up the rebels. General Suetonius Paulinus was already rubbing his hands together. He already saw his triumph. He already imagined how he would lead this red-haired fury along the Via Sacra in chains, how he would throw her into the Tullianum, how he would force her daughters to walk behind the chariot. He already heard the Senate's ovation. But Boudica was smarter. She had learned the lesson. She knew that for Rome, her body was the main trophy. A living Boudica in Rome is proof of victory. A dead Boudica on the battlefield is just a corpse. And she deprived them of the climax. She took poison. Imagine Suetonius's face when he was reported that the queen was dead. His triumph crumbled into dust. His main toy was stolen. He won, yes, but it was an empty victory. Instead of a golden parade, he got a scorched province and a mountain of his fellow citizens' corpses. Boudica showed the world that the Roman machine of humiliation has a vulnerability. The victim can always choose an exit. Death is the last freedom that cannot be taken away. She did not let them enjoy her fear. She did not let the crowd hoot after her. She left on her own terms, leaving Rome only ashes and the taste of bile. It was a spit in the face of the empire that nothing could wash away. Boudica's story became a grim reminder for every procurator. If you back a rat into a corner, it will jump at your throat. If you take everything from a person, you make them free from fear. And then, they will burn your city down. But Rome is a stubborn student. It rarely learns from its mistakes. Pride is a drug impossible to quit. It always seems to the empire that next time will be different, that the next victim will be submissive, that the script written in the Senate will be played without a hitch. And indeed, sometimes the script does break, but not at all in the way Boudica did it. Not through fire and rage, but through something far more dangerous for a dictator. Through sudden, uninvited pity. A century before the fire of Londinium, the great Julius Caesar, a man who seemingly knew everything about the crowd, faced a situation where his own show turned against him. And the cause was not an army of barbarians. but one little girl in chains. Let's transport ourselves to 46 BC. Rome is buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Gaius Julius Caesar is celebrating not one, but 4 triumphs in a row. 4 days of continuous madness, wine and blood. Gaul, Pontus, Africa, Egypt, the whole world lies at his feet, packed into wooden crates and golden cages. This is the peak of the dictator's power. He is the chief director of this play, and the script seems flawless. The Romans are supposed to squeal with delight, looking at the defeated enemies. But right here, at the zenith of fame, the great Caesar, a genius of strategy, makes a mistake that even a novice director at the theater of Pompey would not be forgiven. He forgets the main rule of propaganda. The enemy must evoke fear or disgust, but under no circumstances, pity. Captives of the Egyptian campaign are brought onto the stage. The crowd expects monsters, expects treacherous assassins, priests of dark cults, Nubian giants. But instead, they see a girl. Her name is Arsinoe. She is the younger sister of Cleopatra, the very Cleopatra who, at this exact moment, ironically, lives in Caesar's villa as an honored guest. But Arsinoe ended up on the wrong side of history. She dared to declare herself queen, and now she is paying the bill. Look at her through the eyes of a simple Roman baker standing in the crowd. She is only about 15 years old. She is fragile, scared to death. The golden chains she is shackled in weigh more than she does. They clink on her thin wrists, rubbing the skin to the raw meat. She walks, stumbling, and tears stream down her face, washing away the royal makeup. And then the incredible happens. The humiliation machine that worked without glitches for centuries suddenly jams. Instead of whistling, hooting, and throwing rotten vegetables, the crowd falls silent. That hum of hatred we heard at Aurelian's triumph suddenly cuts off. Silence falls, in which only the clinking of chains and the sobbing of a child are heard. And then happens what Caesar feared most. People start crying. The plebeians, those cruel spectators of gladiator fights who just yesterday were placing bets on how fast a lion would tear a Christian apart, suddenly see in Arsinoe not an enemy of the state, not a trophy, but simply an unhappy girl. In their eyes, she is a victim of tyranny. Imagine Caesar's face on the chariot. His jaw sets like stone. His triumph, his finest hour, turns into a farce. He wanted to show the might of Rome, crushing a dangerous opponent. But he showed the sadism of a grown man mocking a child. The crowd's empathy is poison for a dictatorship. If the people start pitying the victim, they stop fearing the executioner. And if they stop fearing, they start asking questions. Is this just? Does this man have too much power? It was a colossal failure of the script. Caesar feels the mood of the crowd changing. Pity is replaced by a dull murmur. Romans do not like feeling like accomplices to child murder. It spoils their appetite before the festive feast. The dictator is forced to improvise on the fly. By tradition, after the parade, Arsinoe should have been strangled in that same Tullianum. It would have been the logical finale. But Caesar understands. If he kills her now, the crowd might riot. He cannot make a martyr out of her right here, in front of everyone. He cancels the execution. Arsinoe is exiled to Ephesus, to the temple of Artemis. Her life was spared not out of mercy, but out of fear of his own people. Caesar learned the lesson: never show the enemy as a human. The enemy must be a caricature, a beast, a monster. If you show their human face, you lose. But there was another spectator in Rome that day who watched this disgrace very carefully. Cleopatra. She saw everything. She saw her sister in chains. She saw how the crowd first pitied her and then forgot as soon as the free wine was brought out. And she understood one thing that changed the course of history forever. She realized that never, under any circumstances, would she allow Rome to do this to her. Cleopatra was smarter than her sister. She was a player on a different level. Watching Arsinoe's humiliation, she made a vow to herself. Her body would never become a prop in someone else's show. The Romans could have her kingdom, her treasures, even her children, but they would never get her as a trophy for a parade. She would not evoke pity. She would remain a legend. And when years later, another Roman, the cold and calculating Octavian, came for her in Alexandria, he would be sure the script was ready. He would think he had accounted for Caesar's mistakes, but he would not account for the fact that Cleopatra had already written her own finale. A finale in which the winner gets only an empty cage and the mockery of a dead queen. The battle of wits between the Queen of Egypt and the future Emperor of Rome would become the culmination of this bloody theater. Octavian wanted to drag her along the same Via Sacra, but Cleopatra prepared a surprise for him that lay at the bottom of a basket of figs. And this surprise deprived Octavian of the main pleasure in his life. Alexandria, 30 BC. The air in the mausoleum is stale, heavy, soaked in the scent of death and the last most expensive incense. Here, in this luxurious tomb, the final match of the greatest chess game of antiquity is playing out. On one side of the board, Octavian, the future Augustus, a human calculator, a cold bureaucrat who turned war into an accounting report. On the other, Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, a woman who understood what her sister Arsinoe did not. In the game with Rome, one cannot hope for mercy. One can only hope for a timely death. Octavian is obsessed. He does not need Cleopatra the lover. He does not need Cleopatra the ally. He needs Cleopatra the exhibit. He already sees the day in minute detail, how he rides through Rome, and behind his chariot, clanking chains, walks the woman who seduced two of the greatest Romans. It is supposed to be his mic drop, the definitive proof that he surpassed both Caesar and Antony. He assigned guards to her not to prevent her escape, but so she would not, gods forbid, kill herself. All sharp objects were taken from the queen. Slaves checked every goblet of water. Octavian guarded her like a prize racehorse before the Derby. But he underestimated one detail. He thought he was fighting a woman, but he was fighting a myth. Cleopatra knew, if she stepped onto the cobblestones of the Via Sacra, the myth would die. Only an aging, humiliated slave would remain under the hooting of the crowd. And she strikes where Roman steel is powerless. Legend has it that the snake was smuggled in a basket of figs. The peasant who brought the fruit smiled at the guards. The Romans, those dull soldiers, checked the basket, saw ripe fruit, and let death inside. A cobra hidden under the leaves is not just a method of suicide. It is a symbol. The uraeus, the sacred snake of the pharaohs, protector of royal power, delivers the final bite, saving its mistress from disgrace. When Octavian's legionaries break down the doors of the mausoleum, they are exactly a few minutes too late. The scene they see is worthy of a painter's brush, not a centurion's report. Cleopatra lies on a golden bed. She is dead, but she does not look like a victim. She is wearing royal robes, a diadem. Her makeup is flawless. She left not as a fugitive, but as a ruler accepting sleep. Her handmaiden, dying at her mistress's feet, straightens her crown. "It is extremely fine," she whispers to the soldiers bursting in, "and fitting for the descendant of so many kings." Octavian is furious. His face, usually devoid of emotion, is twisted in a grimace of rage. His climax has been stolen. His main prize has been stolen. He summons the silly, snake charmers who know how to suck poison from wounds. Imagine this master of the world panicking and ordering to resuscitate a corpse of an enemy just to drag it through the streets. But the cobra's venom works fast. The Queen of Egypt showed Rome the middle finger from the afterlife. And here we are again in Rome, a year later. 29 BC. Octavian's triumph. It is a grandiose event, 3 days of festivities, but a hole gapes in the center of the procession. Everyone knows who is missing here. The crowd waited for Cleopatra. The crowd wanted to see the Egyptian harlot on her knees. What does Octavian do? He commits an act balancing on the verge of absurdity and desperation. He orders a statue to be made. A platform is pulled along the Via Sacra. On it stands a wax doll of Cleopatra. It is life-size, painted by the best masters. A snake, also made of wax, is coiled around her arm. The Romans look at this, and a strange feeling hangs in the air. It is a surrogate, a fake. Instead of living fear, instead of the smell of sweat and horror, they are shown theatrical props. It is pathetic. The great victor Octavian, the man who destroyed the Republic, is forced to drag a big doll through the city because a real woman proved stronger than his legions. The crowd looks at the wax face and understands. The emperor is afraid even of the dead queen. He tries to humiliate the doll, but he humiliates himself. At this moment, the triumph turns into a farce. The victory exists, but it tastes of wax and cheap paint. Cleopatra, even in death, dictates the terms of the parade. She remained in history as a proud beauty on a golden bed, not a broken old woman in chains. She beat the system. She used death as a teleporter to escape the Roman hell. But let's be honest, Cleopatra is an exception. It is survivor bias, or rather, died beautifully bias. She was lucky. She had poison, she had loyal servants, and she had time. For the majority of those who fell into the millstones of a Roman triumph, such luxury was unavailable. For the majority, a happy ending in the form of a quick death by snake was an unattainable dream. The reality for the rest was far more prosaic, dirty, and infinitely long. If Cleopatra died in the scent of figs and incense, then our next hero faced a completely different atmosphere. Imagine falling into a deep pit, at the bottom of which squelches icy sludge. You have just been stripped not only of clothes, you have been stripped of human semblance. And it was done so roughly that along with the golden earrings, your earlobes were torn off. Welcome to the real world of Roman mercy. Welcome to the cell of the Numidian king Jugurtha, a man who learned what the true cold of a Roman heart is. 104 BC. We return to the foot of the Capitol, where the air trembles with the shouts of the jubilant crowd, but our path lies in the opposite direction from the light. In the shadow of Gaius Marius's triumph stands a man who once threw the boldest phrase in history in Rome's face: "A city for sale and doomed to quick destruction if it should find a buyer." This is Jugurtha, king of Numidia, lion of the desert. A man who for years bought Roman senators wholesale and retail, believing that gold is the universal language of the world. But today, gold is silent. Today, Jugurtha learns what happens when Rome runs out of patience, and the deal is annulled by the sword. The scene unfolding before the entrance to the Tullianum resembles a mugging in a dark alley more than an act of state justice. The legionaries surrounding the king see neither an enemy nor a human in him. They see a walking wallet. Jugurtha is still in his royal robes. He is wearing jewels he put on for the parade by order of the victors. And these ornaments are driving the soldiers mad. They do not wait for the order to remove his regalia. They pounce on him like a pack of hyenas. Imagine this moment. No solemnity. Dirty hands grab the silk of the tunic. The fabric rips. But the soldiers do not care about the fabric. They are interested in the metal. Someone tears off a necklace, almost choking the king. But the most terrible thing happens a second later. One of the legionaries sees heavy gold earrings in the Numidian's ears. He does not waste time undoing the clasp. He has no time for delicacy. He just yanks. A sharp jerk. The crunch of cartilage. Splashes of hot blood on cold stones. Jugurtha does not even have time to scream before he loses not only the gold, but also the lobes of his own ears. Bloody, half-naked, humiliated to the state of a piece of meat, he is dragged to the black hole in the floor. This is the maw of the Tullianum. Below is darkness. Below is water mixed with sewage seeping from the city sewers. This is the bottom of the world. And into this fetid sludge, they throw the one who is used to the hot sun of Africa. Splash. Icy water burns the wounds. Darkness instantly snaps its jaws shut. And precisely at this moment, standing waist-deep in icy filth, shivering from cold and shock, Jugurtha utters a phrase that will go down in history as the standard of insane irony. His mind cannot withstand the sharp drop, from the pinnacle of power to the bottom of a cesspool. He starts laughing, hollowly, hysterically, frighteningly. His laughter echoes off the wet walls of the stone sack. "By Hercules!" he screams into the darkness. "How cold this bath of yours is, Rome!" This is not a joke. It is the scream of a mind shattering into pieces. In this cry is everything. The realization of the end, and the mockery of Roman civilization, which prides itself on its thermal baths, but offers enemies a bath in shit. The Romans above, closing the hatch, possibly heard this laughter. But they didn't care. To them, Jugurtha ceased to exist the second his feet touched the bottom. The most terrible part begins. Torture that cannot be shown in a beautiful movie. Torture where there is no executioner with a whip. There is only darkness, cold, and hunger. Jugurtha died for 6 days. 6 endless days in absolute darkness. Imagine this time. Hour after hour. You do not see your hands. You hear only the dripping of water and your own breathing, which becomes increasingly raspy. First goes pride, then goes hope. Then goes the human semblance. Hunger begins to devour him from the inside. The body, deprived of food, begins to digest itself. The great king, warrior, strategist, turns into a shivering animal crawling on the slippery floor, trying to feel for something edible, but finding only stones and slime. They say by the end of the 3rd day, he began to gnaw his own flesh, just to drown out the pain in his stomach. Rome sheds its white toga here. Here there is no law of nations, no laws, no Senate debates. Here there is only pure, distilled sadism. It was not enough for the empire to kill him. The empire needed him to rot alive. So that he, lying in his own filth, would understand. His money does not work here. His power here is 0. This is total dehumanization. A human is taken apart, First they took the crown, then the ears, then the mind, and finally, life. When the jailers went down 6 days later to pull out the body, they found not a king. They found an emaciated, contorted corpse with a grimace of horror on its face, which bore little resemblance to a human. He was dragged by hooks along the Gemonian stairs and thrown into the Tiber. The river accepted him without questions, carrying the body toward the sea, to the shores of that very Africa he had lost. Jugurtha's story teaches us one terrible thing. The Roman triumph has a basement, and in this basement, there is no room for nobility. If above, on the Capitol, emperors play gods, then below they become demons. Jugurtha's icy bath is the true temperature of the Roman soul. Cold, calculating, indifferent cold. But Jugurtha's death, however terrible it was, had one advantage. It was relatively quick. 6 days is an eternity when you are in hell, but it is just a moment on the scale of history. The Romans knew how to kill quickly, but they also knew how to kill slowly, very slowly. There is a torture worse than hunger, worse than cold, worse than physical pain. It is the torture of hope, the torture of time. Imagine you are not killed immediately. You are put on a shelf like a forgotten item and left there to gather dust for years. You are alive, but you do not exist. You are waiting for your entrance on stage, but the curtain never rises. Such was the fate prepared for the man who managed to unite the scattered tribes of Gaul and almost brought Caesar to his knees. Vercingetorix. A name that sounded like thunder, a name that became synonymous with freedom. But for Rome, he became just canned goods. A living trophy that was marinated in the dark for 6 long years to be served at the table at the right moment. If Jugurtha's death was a sprint into the abyss, then our next hero's fate is a marathon in a coffin. Imagine being buried alive, but they forgot to cover you with earth, leaving a small tube for air. And so you lie not for a day, not for 2, but for 72 months. Let's transport ourselves mentally to 52 BC, the siege of Alesia. The great Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix realizes the war is lost. His people are dying of hunger. To save the remnants of his nation, he commits an act worthy of ancient tragedy. He puts on his best armor, mounts his war horse, and rides out of the fortress gates straight into the Roman camp. He rides around the hill where Caesar is sitting, jumps off the horse, tears off his weapons, and silently sits at the victor's feet. It was a gesture of incredible dignity, the capitulation of a warrior before a warrior. Vercingetorix expected to be killed on the spot, or maybe shackled in chains and taken to Rome to be executed in a month. He was ready for death. He accepted it. But Gaius Julius Caesar is not just a warrior. He is a politician. And politicians do not throw away trump cards, even if the game is postponed. Caesar knew he had a grand triumph ahead, but he also knew that a civil war was brewing in Rome. He had no time for holidays. He needed to deal with Pompey, with the Senate, with Egypt. And Vercingetorix became a victim of Roman bureaucracy and the calendar. He was sent to that same Tullianum. The door slammed shut, and silence fell. Imagine what it means to wait for death for 6 years. Not 6 days like Jugurtha. 6 years. 2,190 days. He sat in total darkness, listening to the world continue to live somewhere up there. Somewhere seasons changed, empires fell. Caesar crossed the Rubicon. The Library of Alexandria burned. Cleopatra gave birth to children. But here, in the stone sack, time stopped. This is the most sophisticated torture the human mind could devise. Torture by hope and uncertainty. Every time the hatch opened above, Vercingetorix probably flinched. Today? But they just threw him a piece of stale bread. No, not today. Wait. The Romans turned the great chieftain into canned goods. They literally pickled him in his own juices to open the jar when it suited the script. Caesar did not care about the suffering of the man in the basement. For him, Vercingetorix was just a line in the inventory list marked, "Hold for later." What happens to a person in 6 years in a damp pit without sunlight? Muscles that once held a heavy Gallic sword atrophied and turned into rags. Skin became pale, like that of a deep-sea fish. Eyes accustomed to eternal gloom forgot what the sun looks like. The mind, deprived of communication, began to devour itself, replaying the same memories of the forests of Gaul, which were becoming dimmer and dimmer. He went mad and came back 1,000 times. He probably prayed for death. He envied his warriors who died in battle at Alesia. They left free. And he became a thing placed on a far shelf. And finally, the year 46 arrives. The civil war is over. Caesar is the master of the world. It is time to get the old toys out. The hatch opens. Soldiers descend into the cell. They drag out something vaguely resembling a human. This is no longer the proud warrior with sculpted muscles the legionaries remembered. This is a broken, half-blind old man who squints and covers his face with his hands because daylight causes him physical pain. He is washed, dressed in some rags imitating royal clothes, and heavy chains are hung on him. But the chains hang like a sack because the body underneath has withered. He is led through the streets of Rome. The crowd roars, "Vercingetorix! Vercingetorix!" They remember the legend. They expect a monster that almost destroyed their legions. But they see a wreck. He walks, stumbling, not understanding where he is or what is happening. The noise of the crowd, for him, accustomed to the silence of the grave, is like hammer blows to the head. This is not a triumph over an enemy. This is mockery of a corpse in which breath still lingers. Caesar rides ahead, shining with glory. He shows the people, "Look, I tamed this hurricane." But that is a lie. The hurricane died down on its own, suffocating in the basement. Caesar defeated time, not the man. When the procession reaches the capital, the dictator's chariot turns toward the temple, and Vercingetorix, like a used napkin, is again turned toward the Tullianum. His mission is accomplished. He walked his 500 meters of fame. He is no longer needed. They did not torture him for long. The executioner simply threw a noose and tightened the knot. Quietly, routinely, without pathos. After 6 years of waiting, his life was cut short in a second as soon as the parade spotlights went out. Think about this cynicism. A man was kept alive for 6 years just for 1 hour. His entire life, all his suffering, every breath in that dark pit, all of it was fuel for the vanity of a single man. The Roman machine of humiliation reached its absolute here. It showed that it can not only kill, but put life on pause. It can steal time from you, the only resource that cannot be replenished. Vercingetorix paid for Rome's greatness not with blood, but with years of meaningless existence in darkness. But history loves balance. Rome, which played so easily with other people's lives, turning kings into furniture and props, would one day find itself in the role of the humiliated. The law of the boomerang is inexorable. And 3 centuries after the death of the Gallic chieftain, the empire itself would learn what it is like when your emperor is used not as a ruler, but as a footstool. The grotesque that the future is preparing will surpass even the wildest fantasies of Roman sadists. Because this time, it will not be a barbarian in chains, but a living god, Jupiter's vicar on earth. And he will be humiliated not in a dark basement, but under the open sky of the east, in front of thousands of enemies. Karma is not a philosophical concept. In history, it is a physical law, as immutable as gravity. If you throw a boomerang soaked in blood and humiliation for centuries, one day it will return. And it won't just hit your hands. It will take your head off. We transport ourselves to the year 260 AD. The Roman Empire, that colossus which seemed eternal, begins to wobble. Cracks run through the foundation, but the most terrible blow comes not from the economy and not from the plague. It comes from the east, from Persia, where the Sassanid dynasty decided it was time to end Roman arrogance. Meet Publius Licinius Valerian, Emperor of Rome, Augustus, a living god. The man whose image is minted on coins from Britain to Syria. He went to war to show the barbarians their place, but the Battle of Edessa ended in a catastrophe that the Roman brain simply refused to comprehend. The emperor was taken prisoner. Not a general, not a senator, but the emperor himself. Jupiter's vicar on earth, alive. If you think he was treated with royal respect, like Alexander the Great treated Darius's family, then you have forgotten what our story is about. The Persian king Shapur I knew history perfectly. He knew what Rome did to captive kings. He heard about Jugurtha in the pit of shit. He heard about Zenobia in chains. And he decided to repay the debt with interest. Shapur did not kill Valerian. Death is too easy for a god. He invented a new position for him at his court, a position that did not exist in any staffing table. Emperor bench. This is not a metaphor, and not a figure of speech. Every time the King of Kings, Shapur, wished to mount his warhorse, he did not use a wooden stand or a servant's back. He snapped his fingers, and the Roman emperor was brought to him. Valerian, dressed in the rags of his once purple cloak, lowered himself into the dust on all fours. Imagine this picture. The man at whose word legions wiped cities off the face of the earth stands on his knees and elbows in the mud, pressing his face into the ground. And the Persian king puts his boot, shod in iron, on the Roman ruler's back like a step, and with a jerk flies into the saddle. At this moment, when the sole of the Persian boot presses into Valerian's spine, the entire Roman myth collapses. All this pompous construction about divine election, about eternal Rome, about invincible legions, turns to dust. The Roman emperor is just furniture, comfortable, soft furniture for the real winner. Valerian lived in this hell for several years. Every day, a new humiliation. He was a living monument to his country's shame. Roman ambassadors offered mountains of gold for him. They offered provinces, cities, slaves. But Shapur just laughed. Why does he need gold if he has such a toy? The pleasure of seeing the master of the world crawling at your feet is worth more than any treasure. But the creepiest thing happened when Valerian finally died. His heart could not withstand the shame, or perhaps one of the guards simply took pity on the old man. It would seem the torment was over. The body should be burned or buried. But Shapur was a perfectionist in matters of humiliation. He did not give Valerian peace even in death. The skin was flayed from the emperor's body, whole, like from a sacrificial ram. Roman masters of taxidermy could have envied the Persian craftsmen. Valerian's skin was stuffed with straw and manure to give it the shape of a human body. And then, and this is the final touch of a villainous genius, it was painted. Bright red, the color of imperial purple, the color of Roman legions, the color of blood. This scarecrow was suspended under the vaults of the main Zoroastrian temple. Imagine the shock of Roman diplomats visiting Persia years later. They were led into the temple, and the first thing they saw was the red scarecrow of their former god swinging near the ceiling. It was an eternal reminder. Look, here is your Rome. It is an empty shell stuffed with shit and straw. This was absolute grotesque. Rome, which for centuries turned people into things, into trophies, into symbols, itself became a thing, an exhibit in someone else's museum of hatred. History closed the circle. The boomerang returned and hit so hard that the echo of this blow is heard to this day. Valerian's fate is a mirror. Romans loved watching the suffering of others, considering themselves spectators in a safe box. But Shapur broke the glass and dragged the spectator into the arena. It turned out that gods are also mortal, and their skin tans perfectly well. It was the end of the illusion. The world saw that Rome could not only be defeated, it could be humiliated. It could be turned into a laughingstock. Fear of the legions began to evaporate like morning dew in the desert. If an emperor can be used as a stool, it means the empire is not a monolith, but a rotten stump. However, even this nightmare happened far away, on the eastern borders, somewhere in the sands. The Senate could pretend it didn't exist. The plebeians could forget about it after another bread distribution. Rome still stood. Its walls were strong, and the gold in the temples shone. But the mechanism of destruction had already been launched. The taboo on humiliating Rome was lifted. And now the threat was approaching not from distant Persia, but from the north. It walked along the same roads built by the legionaries. A century and a half passed. The year 410 arrived. And approaching the gates of the Eternal City was one who did not intend to stage theatrical performances with skin and straw. He did not need scarecrows. He did not need slaves. He had a sword, and he knew that Rome was not a sacred temple, but just a big warehouse that no one had guarded for a long time. His name was Alaric, and he came not to participate in a triumph. He came to cancel it. Forever. August 24th, 410 AD. Night. At the Salarian Gate, there are no torchlight processions, no solemn hymns, no rose petals. There is silence that makes the blood of the sentries on the walls run cold. This silence is scarier than any battle cry. And suddenly it is interrupted not by the blow of a battering ram breaking century-old oak, and not by the rumble of catapults. It is interrupted by the quiet, almost intimate squeak of hinges. The gates open from the inside. Rome, which had not seen an enemy within its walls for 800 years, did not fall in battle. It fell because someone, a slave, a traitor, or just a man tired of lies, slid back the bolt. Alaric's Visigoths enter the city. Forget the fairy tales about wild barbarians in skins who do not know which end of the sword to hold. These people served in the Roman army. They know Roman tactics. They wear Roman armor. They speak Latin better than many senators. But in their eyes, there is no respect for the eternal city. In their eyes is only the cold calculation of a debt collector who has come to collect an overdue debt. And they walk along the Via Sacra. Along that very sacred way, every stone of which we have studied, following Zenobia, Jugurtha, and Vercingetorix. But this time the movement goes in the opposite direction, and the rhythm of this march is different. Previously, the chains of captives clinked here. Now the steel of conquerors clinks here. Previously, Romans stood on the roadsides and spat in the faces of defeated kings. Now, Romans hide in the basements of their villas, clamping their hands over their children's mouths so the patrol won't hear their crying. Those who yesterday considered themselves masters of the universe, today pray to their new Christian god, or the old Olympians. It doesn't matter who, just let it blow over. But prayers do not work when history passes judgment. Alaric does not want a triumph. He does not need laurel wreaths. He does not need to go up to the temple of Jupiter to slaughter a bull. He came for what Rome destroyed nations for over centuries. He came for the gold.
The greatest expropriation in history begins.
The humiliation machine that worked on intake for centuries, sucking in the wealth of the world, broke down. The flow reversed. Alaric's soldiers carry everything out of temples and palaces. Gold statues are melted down right on bonfires lit on mosaic floors. Precious stones are gouged out of the eyes of marble gods with daggers. Silks soaked in purple are torn for foot wraps. Think about the irony of this moment. The Visigoths carry out the seven-branched lampstand, the menorah that Titus stole in Jerusalem. They load silver brought from Greece onto carts. They take the gold of Carthage. Everything Rome looted for 1,000 years, everything paid for with blood and the humiliation of millions of people, is now leaving the city. The bank has been robbed. The vault has been cracked open. Alaric laughs. But it is not the insane laugh of Jugurtha in the icy pit. It is the laugh of a winner who sees that the emperor has no clothes. The great empire turned out to be a paper tiger. All this pathos, all these statues, all these talks about the white man's burden and civilization, all of it was held together only by fear. As soon as fear disappeared, Rome disappeared too. For 3 days the city is in the power of the Goths, just 72 hours. But in these 72 hours, the world changed forever. In these days, the Tullianum is empty. There are no captives in it. The door is wide open, and only ash from burning palaces on the Palatine flies inside. Ghosts of the past, the strangled Vercingetorix, the eaten-alive Jugurtha, the humiliated Simon Bar Giora, are finally free. Their prison is destroyed. Their executioners have now become victims themselves. Roman matrons, proud patrician women who loved watching gladiators die, are now experiencing the fate of Boudicca's daughters themselves. Soldiers do not distinguish between lineages and ranks. The violence Rome exported for centuries has returned home. It is a boomerang that flew for 400 years, and it hit with such force that it split the very axis of time. Antiquity ended. The Middle Ages began. When on the third day Alaric gives the command to leave, he leaves behind not just a looted city. He leaves the corpse of an idea. The idea that one can build eternal happiness on the unhappiness of others. The idea that greatness is measured by the number of slaves. The Goths leave along the Appian Way, and their carts creak under the weight of Roman gold. Dust settles on the ruins of the Forum. Surviving Romans crawl out of their shelters. They look at empty pedestals, at the broken noses of their emperors, at the soot-covered walls of the Senate. And in this deafening silence that hung over the ashes, a single question hangs. A question we must ask ourselves now, standing at the final point of our investigation. Was it worth it? Were these endless parades, these tons of golden chains, these broken spines of kings, these heroes strangled in basements, these rivers of blood? Was all of it worth it to eventually become just another chapter in a history textbook titled The Fall of the Empire? Rome's greatness was bought on credit from the devil. Interest accumulated for centuries, and when Alaric the debt collector came, payment had to be made not only with gold, but with the future. Look at these ruins today. Tourists take selfies against the backdrop of the Colosseum, not hearing the screams absorbed into these stones. They walk through the Forum, not smelling the fear. But you now know the truth. You know what hides behind the marble facade. You have seen the underside of the triumph. You have heard the wheeze in the Tullianum. The Roman triumph was not a celebration of victory. It was a ritual that slowly killed the soul of the victor himself. And when the soul died, only the body remained. A beautiful, marble, dead body of a city that thought it would live forever. The emperor rode to Jupiter, and the captive rode to hell. But in the end, centuries later, they met at the same point, at the point of oblivion. And the only thing left of their ambitions is the dust we are now shaking off our sandals as we leave the Via Sacra.